Welcome to this Nedbank Financial Market Educational Series, proudly brought to you by our online share trading division. In this educational series, we will discuss various topics related to financial markets. Learning about trading and investing is essential for every client, as this will equip you to make more informed personal trading and investing decisions. As a client, you want to make money. However, there is more to these terms than meets the eye. This session will unpack the concept of short selling and what it entails. This is a complex topic that every novice trader should have a broad understanding of. We will start with the basic elements of short selling that most traders will already be familiar with. Then we will progress to the more complex elements. Please note that this session is for intermediate to advanced level traders. Before we start, please refer to our disclaimer. In summary, you cannot regard this session as any trading or investment advice, as the information has been provided for educational purposes. Let us commence this session. Let us start by defining what is meant by trading long. When used in trading, trading long refers to a position that makes profit if a share price increases, usually used in context as taking a long position or going long. Going long is the opposite of going short or shorting that we will discuss shortly. Taking a long position doesn't necessarily mean owning the asset. Derivatives like contract for differences or CFDs and single stock futures contracts or SSFs all provide the facility for traders to take a long position on a market without actually owning the underlying asset. So what is meant by trading short? Shorting, also known as short selling or selling short, is a trading strategy where a trader sells a share today and buys it back in the future when the price of the share moves lower. It is effectively the opposite approach to a traditional long trade, where a trader buys today and sells it at some point in the future to realize a profit, typically trading long. It follows the same buy low, sell high mentality as a long trade, but it just reverses the order. In other words, sell high, buy low. When shorting, a trader sells high today in hopes that the price will go down so they can buy low in the future, typically trading short. Shorting a share is a bit more complicated than going long on a position. Let's use a classic example to explain how the short selling strategy works. Imagine you have two traders, Trader A and Trader B, who decide to take opposite positions in a specific share. The share currently has a market price of 100 Rand per share. Keep in mind that the share is trading at 100 Rand per share. Trader A decides to buy 1,000 of these shares, thereby investing 100,000 Rand. 100 Rand per share times 1,000 shares. His capital outlay will therefore be 100,000 Rand. Keep in mind that the share is still trading at 100 Rand per share. Trader B decides to short sell 1,000 of these shares, thereby gaining 100,000 Rand. 100 Rand per share times 1,000 shares. Shorting usually occurs through a derivative instrument like a CFD. Remember, that's a contract for difference. In this note, we will refer to a share to keep the discussion simple. The question is, how can you sell a share that you do not own? Well, often the process involves selling a borrowed share. In a brokerage derivative account, you can sell a position without owning it, by borrowing the share from your broker and then short selling the stock. This leaves you, the trader, with a net short position and the proceeds from the sale. The trader has an obligation to buy these shares back in the market to close the position, after which the trader can keep the difference between the price they sold the share at and the price at which they bought the share back. Your broker will assist you with this process. The money made from the initial sale obviously does not really belong to you, since you sold someone else's shares to get it. But eventually, when you buy the share back, known as covering your short, you will be able to return the borrowed shares and keep whatever money is left over. This is how you profit from the trade. What happens when the share price rises? Keep in mind that the share was transacted at 100 Rand per share, and the share is now trading at 105 Rand per share, therefore an increase of 5 Rand per share. Let us take a look at the long position of Trader A. To recap, Trader A bought 1,000 shares at 100 Rand per share, and his capital outlay was therefore 100,000 Rand. Trader A will now have a profit of 5 Rand per share when the share price moves to 105 Rand per share, and his profit will be 5,000 Rand. That is the difference between the 105 Rand per share or the selling price minus the 100 Rand per share or the entry price times the number of shares. Now let us look at the short position of Trader B. To recap, Trader B sold 1,000 shares at 100 Rand per share and therefore received capital of 100,000 Rand. At 105 Rand per share, Trader B will have a loss of 5 Rand per share, which means her loss will be 5,000 Rand. That is the difference between the 105 Rand per share or the purchase price minus the 100 Rand per share or the entry price times the number of shares. The winner in this instance is Trader A. But what happens if the share price declines? Keep in mind that the share was transacted at 100 Rand per share, and the share is now trading at 95 Rand per share, therefore a decrease of 5 Rand per share. Let's look what happens to the long position of Trader A. Remember that Trader A bought 1,000 shares at 100 Rand per share, and his capital outlay was therefore 100,000 Rand. Trader A will now have a loss of 5 Rand per share when the share price moved to 95 Rand per share, and his loss will be 5,000 Rand. That is the difference between the 95 Rand per share or the selling price minus the 100 Rand per share or the entry price times the number of shares. Let's look what happens to the short position of Trader B. Remember that Trader B sold 1,000 shares at 100 Rand per share, and her capital received was therefore 100,000 Rand. Trader B will now have a profit of 5 Rand per share if she buys when the share price moves to 95 Rand per share, and her profit will be 5,000 Rand. That is the difference between the 95 Rand per share or the buying price minus the 100 Rand per share or the entry price times the number of shares. The winner in this instance is Trader B. But this raises an interesting question. Up until this point, Trader B has not actually contributed any of her own money. So how is she going to buy back the shares for more money than what is in her brokerage account? This is where the concept of margins come into play. To short a position, traders need to post what is known as an initial margin into their brokerage account, which acts as a buffer should the position lose value. For example, the margin requirement to short the 1,000 shares could be 20%. The margin percentage is in most instances calculated by the broker. It will change on a regular basis and depends on the risk associated with the share. Shares with a higher margin requirement will be regarded as high risk. So if the margin on this deal was 20%, Trader B would have contributed 20,000 Rand, that is 20% of the 100,000 Rand of her own capital, to accommodate for any losses. This is termed the value or exposure of the position. This amount still belongs to the trader, but is held as collateral by the broker to ensure that Trader B can afford to buy back the position on the borrowed shares at some future date. Trader B will also be responsible for what is known as margin calls, a process that occurs when the margin held becomes insufficient. In the event that the share price rises to 120 Rand per share, Trader B would receive a margin call to replenish her cash buffer based on what is known as the maintenance margin. Since there's no more wiggle room in his account to accommodate for further losses, 120 Rand minus 100 Rand equals a 20 Rand loss per share times 1,000 shares equals a 20,000 Rand loss. Now, the interesting part is that the broker stands good for the other 80% of the value of the trade, and therefore, a short position does not really belong to Trader B. The next concept is that of a margin account. A big difference between trading long and trading short is that you can only trade short in a margin account. While this has downsides, it does add leverage to the trader's return. What do we mean by this? Well, let's go back to our example of Trader A and Trader B. On an absolute basis, these returns are equal, but on a percentage basis, taking margins into account, they are actually quite different. Trader A lost roughly 5% of his capital when the share price declined to 95 Rand per share. That is 5,000 Rand of 100,000 Rand. Trader B only contributed 20,000 Rand of her own capital to this margin account. She has actually gained 25%. That is 5,000 Rand of 20,000 Rand. In summary, short positions not only flip the percentage return received by traders, but it also amplifies them both on the way up and the way down. And here is where we get into the distinct disadvantages of a short position. Namely, short positions come with unique costs that a standard long trader will not face. Let's discuss these unique costs in more detail. Keep these costs in consideration when you decide to short sell a share. If the shares that Trader B borrowed pay a dividend, Trader B will need to pay this amount to her broker, meaning that she will face a cost equal to whatever dividend the share pays, i.e. a dividend of X Rand per share times 1,000 for the 1,000 shares that were borrowed. The potential profit will come from the decline in the share price. However, if a dividend has been paid, the dividend amount will need to be paid back, which will reduce the profit figure. Short positions also charge traders a lending fee on the value of the shares they borrowed. After all, since he is borrowing and selling someone else's shares, he needs to compensate the lender in the same way that you would compensate a bank with interest on a loan. This lending fee can be higher for what are known as hard-to-borrow shares or highly volatile shares. There can also be adjustments to the margin percentage requirement for such shares. For being short the share, the trader will earn interest or funding costs. But we will save this concept for a later discussion. So, needless to say, shorting shares can be quite a bit more expensive than simply buying shares. But for the most part, these expenses are fair. The interest makes sense since you are taking a leveraged position. And since you are trying to inverse the return of a long position, it is only natural that you pay out the dividend received from the share. But there are some absolute disadvantages involved in shorting shares, some of which may very well turn you off the idea of ever trying to short a share. For one, short selling faces what is known as buying risk, the chance that a broker will make you prematurely cover your position. This can occur for a number of reasons. A broker may need to return a share to the portfolio or lender they took it from, or the share may simply see a surge in demand. But the result is that you may be forced to close your position at any time. This is a pretty significant drawback, especially when it comes to waiting out market volatility. Luckily, this will seldom happen. On top of this, when shorting a share, you may experience what is known as a short squeeze. When a heavily shorted share sees its price surge because traders shorting the share need to cover their position. Since traders who short sell have an appropriately shorter time horizon than long investors, there is a chance that they buy back the shares around the same time, which can lead to a surge in the price and make it harder for traders to cover their position without realizing a loss. There are some distinct disadvantages with shorting a share, which alone may lead you to stay away, but perhaps the biggest risk with short positions has to do with their skewed payoff. You can lose a lot more money than what you have initially invested. And indeed, this very feature has had devastating impacts on traders. This is why many traders tend to stick with long-only positions. For many traders, the return is simply not worth the risk, and on top of this is the fact that they are going against the natural upward bias of shares. You are more or less betting against a company that is actively trying to prove you wrong. In summary, short selling certainly does play an important role in the world of trading and investments. You can make a lot of money by playing a short bet against the deteriorating share. If you attempt to short sell a share, you must be prepared to educate yourself on the subject. This strategy is only suitable for those who are experienced traders that possess the knowledge, risk control, and financial capacity to trade such strategies. Also, keep in mind that the trading example of trader A and B did not factor in any of the trading costs. We have come to the end of this session. This educational session was brought to you by Nedbank Online Share Trading. Any examples used in this session are purely for illustrative purposes. Thank you for your time.